Council members Parks and Krikorian are attending a funeral for a police officer, and we're not able to come to this meeting. So if we can, do we have any consent items? Which? 5 through 8? Okay, 5 through 8 are related to business improvement districts, and I don't believe there's any controversy regarding these, and so 5 through 8 are on the consent agenda unless there's an objection. Hearing none, then those matters are recommended for the council approval. If we could go to item number 1.
Item number 1 is the mayor's report relative to the appointment of Ms. Cheryl Parisi and Ms. Sejal Patel to the Workforce Investment Board for the term of February 2nd, 2011 through June 30th, 2013.
If both Ms. Parisi and Ms. Patel can step forward. I have Ms. Parisi up first, so... Is this a reappointment or first-time appointment?
First-time appointment.
Okay. Why do you want to be a member of the Workforce Investment Board?
I've been called to do God's work. 14.3% unemployment in the city of Los Angeles. I can't think of any assignment or any scope of work that's more important in this environment. And I'm particularly committed to ensuring that when this recession ends and when we grow, that a segment of the growth is committed to the public sector and making certain that we can continue to create sustainable jobs in the public sector.
A lot of people are not familiar with the work of the Workforce Investment Board. It's not the most prominently featured. Could you explain what they do and how you would have impact on that?
Well, it's our understanding that it's a large and diverse board, 51 members, half of whom come from the business community. Apparently there are 7 labor seats, and Sejal and I will be filling 2 of those labor seats, each representing different sectors. It will be our role and responsibility to ensure that we are helping to move federal dollars in ways that really will create meaningful and well-compensated middle-class jobs in the city of Los Angeles.
So the Workforce Investment Board handles how much money? I mean, how much money do you approve the recipients of these grants?
I've not sat on the board before, so I couldn't really tell you what my charge will be.
It's $50 million.
$50 million. Okay, great. This is a team effort.
Okay,
so.
that's right.
And those, name some of the programs, if you could, that are funded by the Workforce Investment Board.
Yeah, there's the water. I don't know the exact titles, but I know that there are a lot of green technology trainings and development of the workforce and skill building, and particularly in water conservancy, and then also there is youth programs as well, youth development and
Summer youth employment go through. Does it go through the Workforce Investment Board?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I served on the state Workforce Investment Board for several years, and it was an interesting body, but basically the governor spent it all, and then you just sort of nodded approval for the expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
This Workforce Investment Board is a little more involved than even the state's Workforce Investment Board.
And even the counties, from what I hear.
Yeah. And of course, having worked with you for many years in many different issues, I know that both of you are absolutely dedicated to the commitment of using these dollars to truly have a positive impact on Los Angeles and creating jobs. And so I applaud you for volunteering for this, but it's so consistent with what you do on a daily basis. It's like another thing to do. I just hope you have plenty of time to do all the other stuff that's probably more difficult in your bailiwick. Anyway, I have no problem with any of you. I appreciate your willingness to serve on this panel, and fully expect that the council will approve you. But thank you so much for coming before this committee. And my recommendation would be to approve both of these nominees.
Thank you, sir.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Item number 2.
Item number 2 is a Community Development Department report relative to the authority to release a request for proposals for the new Los Angeles Business Source System for program year 2011-2012.
Good afternoon, Robert Science, Assistant General Manager, CDD.
I'm Todd Wilson with the Office of Economic and Business Policy.
Miguel Acuña with CDD, Regional Director for South Valley.
So the purpose, actually, we'll start there, of redesigning our investment in small businesses. We all know that small businesses are the lifeblood of many communities, especially for inner city communities. Have a great vitality and add a great vitality to the economy. The city itself, in terms of small business, has always invested, and traditionally CDD has operated the the LABAP program. The LABAP program in and of itself was a great program. However, I would argue that was completely underfunded as well, and not managed as a system-wide throughout Los Angeles as a system-wide program. We funded individual, and you're very familiar with VEDC and PACE and some of our other providers. But we didn't have a true delivery system that allowed us to have a citywide mark on small businesses. We had RFP'd our LABAP about 3 years ago, so in terms of doing good procurement practices, it was a time to procure anyway. In conjunction with the mayor's office appointed Todd as the point person for small business from their Office of Economic and Business Policy. We spent the last 4 to 5 months of looking at some of the best practices across the country, in particular New York, where there was a heavy investment by Mayor Bloomberg there in their small business delivery system. So ideally, what we would like to be able to see is an RFP that is going to add value to our previous efforts and build upon that. But we also want to build a system that we could actually get other investments. Right now, we predominantly fund it with CDBG dollars. We don't actually receive any economic development dollars from the federal government other than CDBG. We don't have no commerce dollars. It's really hard for us to actually attract other investments. So having a system that's be akin to our workforce development system and our family source system, we would have the ability to manage the system from CDD, follow the policy guidance set up by council and mayor, and then to have very specific outcomes and goals that we would be able to be accountable for and to report back on a quarterly and annual basis of what we've been able to achieve. The RFP will be an open competition. We would want our current providers to apply. We are going to ask them to apply for with partners, and this is going to be, and again, to bring greater value. Right now we're funding the workforce investment centers for our human resources right now in training dollars, and right now they're disconnected from our current LABAP system. Through this RFP, we're going to force that partnership together. So the providers are going to have to apply with a current WIA provider, and that'll add additional resources. We also would love to be able to get our community college system and our private universities involved and to be one of the standing partners. They also receive streams of money for small business that we will be able to add to the table. We think we could actually probably double the amounts of work that we're currently doing with the same amount of investments that we have, which is approximately $2.4 million that we're currently spending. This RFP funded through the CON plan will be at $2.5 million, and that was out of the mayor's proposed budget.
Okay. Currently, you fund 6 contractors. I'm sorry, 6 contractors. $237,000?
Right.
That's correct? So where's the additional money coming from?
So the additional dollars, we had funded what was called High Growth Initiative, which was a separate RFP that we would actually put out to our providers. And we've done small projects with our downtown business and with MCS, one of our LABAP providers, to do specific industry growth training. We're combining those dollars to be all part of one pool.
Okay. Did you have any comments? Either of you?
I mean, we did, as Robert was saying, we did spend a lot of time trying to try to make this a uniform system. Today, each different operator kind of has their own plan and their own strategy with respect to what they're doing, and we felt that each geographic area of the city should offer the same services, the same kind of level of services, the same expectations. So, this would be branded under the city umbrella, the Los Angeles Business Source System, and we'd have a uniform level of expectations and programs at each of the centers.
Okay, now what in the San Fernando Valley, in my area, the Northeast San Fernando Valley, who are the service providers?
It's a VE.
Valley Economic Development Center.
But that's for the business side of it.
Correct.
Are there any others affected by this?
There is the ICON, Initiating Change in Our Neighborhoods, as a separate funded entity providing also business services.
And they're getting funded by?
The CDBG dollars
Uh-huh.
out of the comp plan.
And what is it they do?
They also provide business assistance to small business and entrepreneurs.
Uh-huh. And do we have the track record?
Yes, we do.
So what's their track record?
Well, since we started working with them to try to provide the same type of services for the rest of the LABAPs, last year the numbers were low, but this year they're doing much, much better.
What is it they do with the money?
Well, they provide workshops for entrepreneurs, people that want to start up their business. They provide one-on-one consulting, access to capital for small businesses.
And so do they provide loans?
They don't. They get the loans through SBA banks.
Oh,
But
They don't have their own capital fund. And ICON was...
so VDC does?
VDC
Correct.
does. So VDC was actually procured under our previous RFP. ICON was not procured through that RFP.
How'd they get their money?
It was by motion of council.
Okay. And so have they initiated any loans?
Yeah, they have a consultant that works directly with them to provide access to capital to some of these businesses.
Okay, now I was under the impression that there was a lot of money that wasn't being utilized.
I think that's probably a separate pot of money that was for more like a housing mixed-use project funds. Those were separate from this particular fund.
But that money wasn't utilized.
That's correct.
Okay, and but they paid for staff?
I believe they have some what they call pre-construction services, to try to determine the feasibility of the projects.
Yeah, I know that's not your
Right.
primary
Right. But there
concern.
were some costs initially for that.
There was what?
There was some cost for that, about 20% of the grants. So
But the program
it didn't go through.
it didn't go through.
Correct.
Okay, so this would create an RFP process, and you're looking at one. So essentially, in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, you would be looking at one service provider, VDC, and theoretically ICON and VDC could compete.
Right.
There might be others. I don't know who, but
Right.
but there would only be one service provider.
Yeah. The way that we're looking at it right now would be one in the North Valley and one in the South Valley.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see. Could be the same.
It could be the same. Right now in our draft of the RFP, which we've given to your staff for input or to receive input, we're not limiting the number of sites an individual organization could apply for, but that's a policy decision if we would choose.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I don't have any cards on this item, and so I'm happy to recommend staff's report. Is that the correct action?
That's it. Thanks,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, this, before you leave, this went through HCD, right?
So it's actually going back to HCD for the final dollar allocation. Our original transmittal had $4 million that we were requesting because we wanted to do 8 centers and a full year's of funding. The comp plan actually only identified $2.5 million, which allows us to do 6 centers with 9 months of funding, which is okay because we'll have 3 months of coverage.
So the matter hasn't been voted on in HCD?
No, it's going to go back to HCD and be voted on with the comp plan with the final dollar allocation.
Okay, thank you. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is a Community Development Department report in response to motion Alarcon-Garcetti relative to the development of a self-sufficiency index and the implementation of a self-sufficiency standard and related matters.
Good afternoon, Olivia Mitchell with the Community Development Department.
Laura Cantu with the Community Development
Good
Department.
afternoon.
Thank you. We're here this afternoon with a follow-up to a report that we presented some time ago with just some updated information, but not necessarily any good news, about the issue of self-sufficiency. We have looked at the issue on behalf of the committee and actually on behalf of the department, began to look at this a number of years ago in terms of how we look at the issue of providing services to poor and low and moderate income individuals and how we were helping them to move to a standard of self-sufficiency. That definition of self-sufficiency is kind of all over the place, but there have been a number of studies around the United States. Some of the people have made presentations to your committee before, most notably the group in the state of Washington, and we want to talk about that. We are reiterating again that as we look at self-sufficiency and the needs of our local population to move from a poor, low-income position to one of self-sufficiency in which they could care for their families, the department is limited in the services that they provide to definitions that are provided by our funding sources. So as we look at whether or not we can help move people from poverty, we do have some restrictions. We estimate that at this point in time, according to the current definition of poverty, that we serve probably about no more than 5 to 10% of the people who are currently eligible. As we look at new standards of self-sufficiency in which we take in the cost of health and food and transportation and rent and et cetera, that would move us, for example, a family of 4 meeting poverty guidelines at approximately $24,000 to what can be as high as $70,000. We are struck by the fact that that would add so many more people to our services. However, there have been others looking at it on a national level and a state level, and we have spent some time, the unit that Laura heads, in researching self-sufficiency, and we brought to your attention, and we actually have copies for people here, a number of studies that have talked about self-sufficiency in California. 2, one from United Way of California, and that is the study that they did on overlooked and other undercounted from 2009, in which using a self-sufficiency standard developed by the University of Washington, they did look at LA County and the other counties in the state. In addition, our own California Budget Project issued a report in June of 2010 looking at self-sufficiency and how much does it cost to raise a family in California using a variety of tables. And we thought the one that was most significant for the city of Los Angeles is a self-sufficiency standard for New York City. We recognize that New York City is another kind of configuration, but we had been asked specifically to help to develop a standard for the city of Los Angeles. And although these other reports from United Way and Insight Institute and the California Budget Project looked at the standard, they looked at the county of Los Angeles, or they looked at for the Budget Project, they looked at a 3 area, Los Angeles City, Long Beach, and Santa Ana. And it still does not answer the question about what do people need in our various communities. We did, one of the national experts is Dr. Pierce from the University of Washington, and Laura can spend a little more time talking about how they use the standard in the state of Washington, but we did meet with her and asked her about the possibility of developing a standard just for our city. A couple of things. She did respond with what it would cost and what it would take to look at the city, but even as we looked at her report, we thought that we would look at the city by planning areas and not by city council districts, which would always be our ideal. But many people do not realize that the 2010 census does not ask income. So we will have no income information coming out of the 2010 census. So even reports as recent as these reports in 2009 and 10 are using 2000 census information on income. The city, we're saying that the city is going to have to utilize some system to determine income. And this is one that we're familiar with, and we would suggest that maybe this is something to be considered. Using the self-sufficiency standard and their methods of going about determining income and what people need to help us pinpoint the issues of poverty and programs as we go along. We brought copies of the study for anyone who wants them. We won't distribute them. We have the copies.
So to provide the kind of information that is requested in the two motions, you would have to rely on this study, and you're recommending that we approve a study, but we haven't identified the source of funding for the study. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do we have any ideas where the money might come from? Or Mr. Sines, you're leaning forward in your chair. That's good because they were both leaning back in their chairs as you were leaning forward.
They said if money comes up, you had to come up. So I think the best that we would should do is actually have a recommendation coming from this committee that will instruct our department to help identify with your office and the CLA's office savings and other dollars. I think it's approximately $90,000 that we will be looking for. And as we know, everything's tight, but I think this is a great investment for all of us to be able to use.
Yeah, well, first let me thank you for looking at all the various ways to look at self-sufficiency. It is a relatively new concept, and yet people have different ways of viewing it, and geographically it's different in every community, what poverty might be. Even people with low income might have a better standard of living than other people who have more income. So, and that could be affected by how far they work from where they live, how many kids they have, what ages the kids are, and what tragedies might have beset them. So, but it would paint a more accurate picture of Los Angeles. For so many people rely on the poverty standard defined by the federal government that we quite often miss so many people who have tremendous needs, and if we could fill those needs, they could probably be so much more productive, and many of the problems that we have in our communities might be reduced because we're more effective with our dollars. So there's a lot of assumptions in the current federal policy poverty guidelines, and they aren't necessarily true. Now, having said that, most of the funding that we get is based on the federal poverty guidelines. So one of the things that the study needs to look at is that reality, and how can we adjust, or how can we expand the services we provide to provide for people of self-sufficiency or who are lacking self-sufficiency, but do not fit into the categories of poverty as defined by the federal government, which would be a greater challenge. But we're not there yet. We do this study, we'll have a much better understanding of that. We might also want to be selective. My idea would, we cannot fund all the people who would fall into the standard of not being self-sufficient. We just couldn't do everything that that needs to be done. But we could perhaps target some populations in that category that are not currently served and do a better job for them than whatever's being done for them now. So that's my goal. Recognizing that we have limited dollars, can we spend them more wisely and have greater impact in a positive way for those families? So I'm absolutely supportive of your recommendation to ask you to explore funding for the study, and also to say that we'll also work with you. My office will also work with you to identify that funding. I don't think $90,000 is so much that we can't find a way to get to this study. It's going to provide us enormously valuable information. So.
And if the Workforce Investment Board folks were still here, actually in that legislation, they ask us to define it locally or give us the opportunity to define it locally. So what we're trying to do is to get all of our commissions and boards to use this self-sufficiency standard, which would actually qualify many more folks for services. So everybody has an interest in making this happen, and it's much more than just poverty, because in Los Angeles' case, it's really working class folks.
Yeah, but I want to caution you, though, that the counter movement to this is that we simply can't fund everything. And when I've talked to members of Congress, they're like, well, we don't want to move all the funding. The Obama administration has actually taken the first step with the Census Bureau actually defining and tracking some of this information already, although it is not official for the purposes of the census. Nevertheless, they are getting that data, and I remember I'll say this publicly. When I bumped into the president when he was first elected at Miguel Contreras High School, he gave a presentation, and I had an opportunity to ask him if he was considering changing the federal poverty guidelines. And he said, I have a lot of things on my plate. He had been elected for about 1 month. He said, I have a lot of things on my plate, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to do that very quickly. So I appreciated his candor, but at the same time, we went to Washington. In fact, some of the people are here. We went to Washington and let it be known that we believe the self-sufficiency standard should be changed. And I met with Rebecca Blank, who is the director of the Census Bureau, and she's an advocate for the self-sufficiency standard. And lo and behold, she was able to incorporate the data, do the tracking of the data. And I asked her what was the change, and she said that she got a message from the White House that they were interested in. She had always advocated tracking the self-sufficiency standard, but she said that they got a message from the White House that the president had heard from so many people across the nation that we needed to change the self-sufficiency standard. So they authorized her to do whatever she could to get us closer to a self-sufficiency standard. And so the advocacy really works if you can get a line with the president. But recognizing that Congress would not be ready to align the allocation of dollars to that self-sufficiency standard, that's why it has been done only as a guideline, not as a formal official record. And so we still have a long way to go before the federal government will be able to address this in a more significant way. But frankly, I think we've come a long way in the last couple of years, and it's because of some of the people who will be speaking in just a second, and those who have advocated this nationally, that we're able to do it. And I think it's smart for Los Angeles to understand what is the true picture of Los Angeles. Let's not pull any punches. Let's know what is really going on in Los Angeles. Not that we can address all the concerns, but we have a better opportunity to address the concerns if we know what they are. And so
I think it's important to say two things. Number one, that standards have been set. using some of these guidelines in at least 42 states, and it's principally a policy guideline. What are we going to do to help move people from poverty and lower income into a higher standard of living? And so there may be some policy issues that the city can address that helps people. I used one example with our own group in saying that when kindergarten went from half day to full day, low income people could go to work. And although we are not tied to that, it is important to know that the school district, the county, and the state must help us, especially since they control a number of the services that people need. When we think of transportation and transportation needs, I'm a public transportation person myself, and then when they begin to cut out routes, when they say because there's a subway there needs to be no bus, people who work in between those stops can't get to work. So there are a number of policy issues that we work on, that joint governments work on, that we can say, if we can provide this service, that will save a family $200 a month with full day child care. It saves people $200 to $500 a month.
Absolutely, and that's fundamentally what I've been saying all along. What benefit is it to make decisions in the dark? I mean, more accurate information cannot make your decisions worse. It might point out the weaknesses and vulnerabilities, but it's not going to make your decision any worse. It might make it better. And so that's our goal. With that, let me let me take the public comments at this time. Cheryl Branch. After Cheryl, we have Debbie Diner Harris.
Thank you, Councilman. First of all, I wanted to thank you and your team, Sarah, for just bringing this matter into. Pardon me? Sarah Brennan.
She is like a team.
The wonderful Sarah for bringing this issue into the full city of LA public discourse. So I think I represent the Los Angeles Metropolitan Churches, which are primarily the city's small to mid-sized African-American storefront congregations. And we are very happy to see this committee, the council, picking this issue up and having a serious, thoughtful debate about how do we help people become self-sufficient. Public assistance was never meant to be a lifestyle. And in many of our communities and populations, that has been an unintended outcome. And you can count on our congregations and our pastoral leaders and members to support you as we think this out very thoughtfully. We are also excited about the opportunity to create new structures and opportunity systems that can actually produce self-sufficient people. In many cases, we have not had systems that produce self-sufficient individuals and families, and we're just excited to see you having this dialogue. So I wanted to encourage you and say, attaboy, attagirl. This is not going to be easy, and we know that we're going to have to find the funding, but our congregations and our leaders, our constituents are committed to helping you do that. And I am a proud member of the LA City Alliance to End Poverty. And thank you so much for this time today.
Thank you. Debbie Diner Harris. After Debbie, we have Marianne Haverhill.
Good afternoon. I'm Debbie Diner Harris, representing the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, and we are here to support our partners in hoping that you as well support the poverty and self-sufficiency standard. As you said, this information will go a long way in providing us the opportunity as service providers to really make some strategic efforts at helping people become more self-sufficient, and we hope that this process is approved and that we can move forward in a positive way that will help so many people.
Thank you. And obviously, organizations that do a lot of giving will benefit from this information.
That is exactly right. We want to have,
just as we will.
We want to be strategic, and we want to make a difference with our partners, and that's why.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Marianne Haverhill, and after Marianne, we have Rhonda Meister. That's two names, Rhonda Meister, not Rhonda Meister. Thank you.
I want to thank you also for your willingness to consider this issue, and
I'm very excited to be here representing the Los Angeles Alliance to End Poverty. It's a newly formed coalition of many, many agencies that work around the poverty issue, whether it be housing or healthcare or social services or mental health or a variety of other related issues. So we are very glad to join together in supporting this initiative. I do want to request that in the study there be consideration given for, yes, the self-sufficiency standard, which I think is very important, and all of us are working toward that for our clients. But also, I think it would be helpful to redefine the poverty standard. As you know, the current standard in federal level for a family of 4 is about $22,000, which anytime I mention that to anybody in the community, they're appalled that it's that low. But on the other hand, I've heard bantered about in terms of a self-sufficiency standard in LA, it might be 60, 70, 80,000. Now, I can tell you because I've seen a lot of salary surveys, for example, of nonprofits throughout LA, that many agencies, have positions that are far below that. And we have to serve those who are poor, and it needs to be clearly defined. But also in terms of convincing stakeholders, this is who you're helping. But I also want to give an example. I work for a multi-service agency that does a lot of different services for low-income people and for uninsured people. And for example, we have a lot of working poor that come to our medical clinic, many of whom are diabetic. And once they've been identified as diabetic, they typically come once a month for ongoing monitoring and so on. They may go home with $1,000 worth of medication. We have to kind of define who is really eligible to get, ultimately could be $12,000 worth of medication in a year. And, is it the person that makes 60, 70, 80,000, or is it a newly defined person living in poverty that might be at 30 or 35,000? I'm just pulling numbers out of the air because I don't know. So the study hasn't been done. But I just think there needs to be kind of a differentiation. And also, as we're talking to stakeholders, if we were to say self-sufficiency in LA is a household income of, just for example, 60,000. But people in poverty are at 30,000. We need to get them there. This is the difference. I think it would kind of help clarify, who it is we're trying to serve with not only governmental dollars, but also private dollars, whether it be foundations or individuals that are contributing to help those living in poverty. So that would be my request as far as the study, and would certainly encourage getting the funding to get this done.
Yeah, it struck me, we're not just talking about salary levels. So somebody making $30,000 whose kids participate in a free lunch program at school is better off than somebody making $30,000 whose kids are not.
Right, and I realize it's a household.
Or get free child care services.
Or food stamps.
Or free transportation.
Right.
So all of those things can contribute. Now, it costs the government far less to pay for child care services for 50 kids and get those people to work, their parents to work, than for us to have to subsidize them in other ways through welfare or other programs. And dollar for dollar, so somebody making $30,000 who's has their kid in a free child care program, actually it grows their net worth into salary wise. And so we have to think in different ways about this. It's not just how much you make. Mm-hmm. It's
the collective income.
It's the totality of your needs,
right?
And how you are filling those needs, whether it be salary, subsistence, support from community organizations, whatever it may be, to really get a beat on who really needs these services more than anyone else. Right. Thank you very much. Rhonda Meister?
Good afternoon. I am here as a member of the LA Alliance to End Poverty and the former executive director of St. Joseph Center in Venice, which has one of the largest food pantries in all of Los Angeles. And just a statistic, in 2010, the food pantry saw a 25% increase in usage. And the food pantry serves housed people, not homeless people. So I think that it's very, very clear that the poverty is growing and has grown because of the recession. But I also think that it's really, really an important step forward for for the city of LA to define the self-sufficiency standards, as well as to create a poverty definition or standard also, which would be inclusive of things that that Councilman Alarcon included in the last comments. Excuse me. Also, I'm in support of this proposal and think that it's important to update the poverty statistics as well. I don't have a lot more to say, except that I think it's incredibly important that we do this. And I believe that United Way and the California Budget Project have also given many, many reasons why this needs to be done. So thank you for your consideration and for your time.
Thank you. I'm very familiar with St. Joe's, and you do great work.
Sorry, you didn't hear.
I'm very familiar with St. Joe's, and I know you do great work. Thank you. Our final, oops, I missed one. Our final two speakers are Flo Green and Yvonne Maria Jimenez.
Good afternoon. I'm Florence Green, and I'm the former executive director of the California Association of Nonprofits, which a job I did for several years, so have a sense of what the needs are of nonprofit organizations and the kind of work they do. I'm also proud to say I'm a member of the Los Angeles Alliance to End Poverty. We have 14 members to date, and we're growing, and hope to have 70 or 80 members within the next year. And our intent is really to help this committee and to support your efforts in creating these new measurements and these new standards for self-sufficiency. It's already been discussed about how current standards are not very adequate in identifying what the needs are, and so to create measures that really include the totality, as you said, Councilman Alarcon, to really include the complex needs. How's that? The complex needs of that most individuals have. We think it's important to also clarify the poverty level as well, so that we can begin to measure what kinds of programs and what kinds of activities are effective at moving people out of poverty. We do an annual conference on poverty with the MEND organization located in Pacoima, and part of our intent is to begin to understand what kinds of services and programs actually make a difference in helping to move people out of poverty, giving people opportunities to step ahead. And the last thing I want to say is we just want to encourage you to reach out to the nonprofit community, to reach out to the LA Alliance to End Poverty, that we want to help in any way we can with this study and with this activity. And any way we can do that, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. Yvonne Maria Jimenez.
Good afternoon. I'm Yvonne Maria Jimenez. I'm the Deputy Director for Neighborhood Legal Services of LA County. We're a law firm, and we wholeheartedly support and endorse that this committee promote and the city promote the development of a LA-specific sufficiency standard tool. We think it's essential to measure the needs of the city, but also how we use our funds to target those needs. One of the essential things that this tool will impact is how we go about making public policy decisions, and which is something very important that the city needs to be attentive to. And I'll give you a very specific example, and that is that currently the way the city measures outcomes is leaving out a great deal of life-transforming outcomes that many of the current funded programs are achieving. And I'll give you an example. If somebody has provided services to obtain legal status in this country, or to become a U.S. citizen that then makes them eligible to obtain jobs such as working in the post office, which is high paying with benefits, or if you obtain for them other things like removing barriers to employment, like expungements, none of that right now qualifies as an outcome reportable achievement under any of the Family Source Center grants, which is something we've addressed with CDD, and we've raised with them, and we're in conversation as to how do we address that in reporting systems and how it deals with it. But it's essential that public policy decisions impact these kinds of issues of how we measure outcomes with regard to the monies that are used to target particular populations that need to be self-sufficient, and that we really measure how we're getting there and making this population self-sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. We have an additional speaker, B. Stotzer.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Just wanted to say I wanted in support of this study and to request that you add a section on asset poor to really define asset poor, because we see this where families are eligible for services, and those families that are not eligible for services that are at risk, our middle class, are very asset poor. They're high in debt. They don't have enough savings to sustain their lifestyle. While they cut back, they don't know what it means to build wealth and to build assets. So if this study could have a section on what it is to define asset poor and what it takes to move into the middle class, it would be a wealth of information for all of us that are providing social services. So, thank you.
I don't know if that's in the study, but...
No, usually never in any poverty study.
And it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So we're happy, when we can find the $90,000, we're happy to talk to the consultant about
it, that's all.
about
I'm
that.
asking just to define it.
Yeah. I am aware of studies that have been conducted by other organizations, and I don't know that there's been sufficient information with regard to how families respond to tragic life events in terms of cost. So what you're saying is if you own a home and you can get a loan during a tragedy, it could be what keeps a roof over your head and enables you to pay for the services. Or if you don't have that, and you might have to seek public assistance, it costs everyone additional expenses. So I fully understand the concept. And in a city where the home ownership ratio is somewhere between 30 and 40%, depending on which study you look at, that means that 60% or more are vulnerable to going broke in a very short period of time if they lose their job. In fact, the concept of entering into poverty if you lose 1, 2, or 3 paychecks is one that people need to understand. In other words, it could be you, not just those people over there. So no, I understand exactly, and I'll work with the department to make sure that occurs. Let me just say to those of you who testified, thank you for being here. The Alliance to End Poverty, first of all, for being believers that we can end poverty. And I've said, the story about the starfish, the guy who goes to visit the place in South America or someplace, and this guy's throwing a starfish back in the ocean one at a time, and the guy says, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm changing the lives, and I'm making a difference." He said, "What are you talking about? There's millions of starfish washing up on the shore, and you're throwing one at a time." And he said, "Yes, but in that one starfish life, I'm making a huge difference. So keep throwing the starfish back." That's my point. It feels like it's overwhelming at times, but if you weren't doing it, I don't know who would do it. And it makes a huge difference in the individual and families that are recipients of your services. So thank you very much. So we will recommend that the department move forward to seek funding for the study that was spoken of, particularly the Washington university-based study of New York City. If we could get that kind of study for the city of Los Angeles, it would be a tremendous benefit. So we would recommend the department do that, and I commit to work with the department to find those resources as well. Thank you very much.
Councilman, there are 2 CBD reports that can be noted and filed along with your recommendation as well.
Okay, those would be noted and filed. Thank you. Item number 4.
Item number 4 is a city attorney report, ordinance, and city treasurer to report relative to the formation of a banking development district.
Valentin Dino, City Attorney's Office. Pursuant to instructions from this committee, we have prepared the current draft of the ordinance, which lays the legal foundation for creating a banking development district program. The intent of this ordinance is basically to encourage the establishment of branches of physical branches of banks in underserved areas. What the ordinance actually does is creates a task force to be headed by the city treasurer and have various city officials on it that will come up with will hold meetings and come up with the appropriate rules to implement this program. Pursuant to the various criteria enumerated in the ordinance, as well as additional ones that the task force may decide are appropriate. And in exchange for for institutions applying for and being included in such districts, they would receive certain benefits from the city, probably the most important of which would be the eligibility for additional investments of municipal funds.
Okay. I understand you would still like to have 30 days to come back with a report on that?
No, this is the second report.
So are you ready to assemble the task force?
Well, that will be up to the treasurer.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Steve Wangale, Interim City Treasurer. I am the one who talked to Sarah and made a commitment to Sarah that we would be coming back in about...
It's Team Sarah. It's Team Sarah now.
Team Sarah. I'm the one who spoke with Team Sarah and came to an understanding that within about 30 days, the Office of the Treasurer would come back with a report to this committee. That report would essentially comment on the ordinance. As it is, my office, or let me say I was not aware of that ordinance. I know it is my responsibility to know, but in any case, I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of the ordinance. I wasn't aware of the instructions that were given to the department in 2009. I just recently started in the treasurer's office.
Okay.
So until I got the call from Sarah a couple weeks ago, I wasn't aware. So I've taken some time to look at the New York's model. And we are ready to review it, comment on it, and review and comment on the ordinance, as well as provide recommendations to the committee for further actions.
Great. So if we continue this for 30 days, you can come back with a report back on the timeline for assembling the task force, and perhaps with and what the task force would be doing, and what schedule they would be on. By the way, the one thing I do want to comment on, I think we want to be careful to focus on branches, and we really want to hone in on services, because many banking services don't look like branches anymore. In the old days, we didn't even have ATMs. Now that's standard procedure. But also, if you go into a grocery store, you can find a lot of banking services, but it's not necessarily a branch. So I don't want to say that we when we talk about banking development districts, we're not so much talking about bank branches as we're talking about bank services. Recognizing, though, that the key service is the lending function. And the alternative for many communities that don't have banks is check cashing institutions that charge egregious interest, and also recognizing that we have 300,000 people, adults in Los Angeles that do not have a bank account. Some people might see this as a criticism of banks, but how could it be a criticism of banks when I'm encouraging them to provide services to communities? I mean, that, to me, that's a contradiction. If I didn't like what banks do, I wouldn't be encouraging them to go into neighborhoods that are not currently being served by them. So I'm pleased that you've received new religion, and we'll be more informed, and we'll come back with a process for us to put together that task force. We do have 2 public comment cards. First, Maya Zutler.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Hi. After Maya, Ann Williams.
Maya Zutler on behalf of VICA, the Valley Industry and Commerce Association. It is our understanding that we're not taking up the entire Banking Development District item today, but merely just discussing the task force issue, which is something that we did want to comment on. We feel very strongly that it is important to have a task force to discuss these issues, but we want to request that there should be representatives from the banking industry on the task force. It's our understanding that just city departments and staff of council offices are participating on the task force, and we feel that representatives from the banking industry have a lot they can offer in terms of the criteria that will be discussed, the regulations that will be discussed, and the staffing and financial implications of such a development district. So we believe that if we are going to move forward with incentives or encouragement for these banking development districts, we feel that industry representation is critical as we proceed forward. Thank you.
I'd rather have you on it.
Great. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Ann Williams of Central City Association, and I'd echo what Maya said. And if it's representatives from our business associations, we could discuss that, but I'm sure that would be doable. I appeared before this committee on this issue in August, and I don't believe that much has materially changed since then, so I'm just going to be brief. First, if there's a task force, as Maya said, we request representation for the banking industry. Our main concern is that this proposal describes ways to incentivize bricks and mortar banks to open in underbanked areas of our city. And putting aside the fundamental question of whether we agree that physical bank branches are will be a relic of the 20th century in the near future, we believe that in this terrible budget environment, any incentives are quickly going to mutate into mandates or penalties because there's simply no money available for real incentives. And this lack of resources is the reason that Governor Schwarzenegger vetoed the similar legislation at the state level just a few months ago. If the city does move forward with some sort of incentive program model, we ask that the funds for these incentives be identified first. Otherwise, the creation of an incentive program is an exercise in futility. We look forward to further discussion on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with both of you more, honestly. And I have no problem with Treasurer Ongeli having bank representatives. I would only ask that in the model that you bring back, we have a representative of, and it doesn't necessarily have to be bank, but maybe a representative of the industry, like an advocacy group of national banks, local banks, and credit unions. I think that would be the best way to approach it. And then other interested parties, of course, that you could work on. I think that's probably the first time I disagreed with Governor Schwarzenegger on anything, but I think there may be a few banks who might view this as a slap in the face, but it really isn't. What we're really trying to do is get their services to people who are now not using their services. I mean, 300,000 unbanked. I don't know how that benefits them, unless they're investing in, and maybe they're the bankers for the check cashing institutions, where they can get 300% interest in a payday loan. So, I mean, they have to bank with somebody. I'm assuming they're banking with a national bank, the check cashing institutions. And even though the banks don't have those standards, check it out, it's true. They can get the extreme interest by carrying the money for the check cashing institutions. And so we want to be careful not to get those banks to be advocating on this task force. So one of the questions I would have for them is, do you have any clients who are check cashing institutions? Because it would be in their interest to not set up branches in those areas so that they would use the check cashing institutions that charge the egregious interest rates. So with that, I do appreciate your comments, though. I think there's an obvious benefit to having somebody who's knowledgeable about the banking institutions just present for the discussion. But secondly, we want them to be a partner in all of this, and we want them to benefit from the customers that are not now using banks, because it's good for our community. I think it has a check cashing is an erratic way to build a life, a foundation for economic stability. Whereas a more traditional banking institution with checking account, savings account, and opportunities for lending is a path toward a more stable future, and that's what we're going for. So we very much want the banks to participate. So with that, we will continue this matter, and Mr. Ongela, you will be reporting back to us in 30 days with a process. We'll be happy to work with you. Team Sarah will be happy to work with you on maybe defining the composition of the task force, and then working with you on the timelines. And I'm looking forward to that report.
Councilman, I'd also like to remind the committee that the CAO was also instructed to report back with any costs associated with the implementation of a BDD program, and also to report on the impact of council district discretionary deposits into BDDs.
Frankly, the task force comes before that. So I don't know where the CAO is, but I'm sure you'll be working with them. But we're not defining how we're going to do this. We're just defining what the task force is going to be challenged with. And those are some of the questions that the task force will hopefully answer.
There's a lot more that will be in the report, but I want to say that any CAO report is not going to be necessary at this time until we determine the scope of what we want to do. So the cost is not going to be relevant until after that.
And I'm hoping it doesn't cost the city anything. I know you can do it.
That's as easy as this morning's council meeting.
We should do more of both, but that's a different issue. But with that, this meeting is adjourned. I have no other public comment cards, so we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.